Labour's civil war deepens as Jeremy Corbyn prepares to take on his leadership challenger and his critics once again. Good evening. Jeremy Corbyn has been pressed by his own deputy to make clear that Labour is not being hijacked by the Trotskyists. So far, the party leader has failed to publish his response. As we go on air, he's about to take part in a hustings debate in Gateshead. Backers of his opponent, Owen Smith, admit privately that they have little prospect of overhauling Mr Corbyn or averting electoral disaster for Labour. Tonight, we attempt to meet the tens of thousands of Corbynistas who look set to hand the current leader victory. They're enthused, they're passionate, they're even singing his praises.
You thought that our fight was gone, oh no. Jeremy's standing strong.
Also tonight, a British schoolgirl who left London to join Islamic State militants in Syria is reported to have been killed. Khadija Sultana, one of 3 school pupils from Bethnal Green to travel to Syria, is thought to have died in a Russian airstrike in Raqqa. Meanwhile, the United Nations is investigating an apparent toxic gas attack on rebel-held areas of the besieged Syrian city of Aleppo. And they took to the streets of India in their thousands to protest against the gang rape and murder of 23-year-old Jyoti Singh in 2012. But her mother says the culture of violence against women remains unchanged.
Today, a female child is like a paper plate. You use her, crush her and throw her away.
And cast your minds back, if you can, to the birth of hip-hop. We'll be speaking to the Hollywood director Baz Luhrmann, whose musical drama set in the South Bronx tries to translate the power of music to the small screen. And we'll be hearing from British hip-hop artists about why the story of this era needs telling and how they're still inspired by the creation of a new musical art form. So it's the second hustings of the Labour leadership campaign in the party's traditional heartland of Tyneside. But these are unusual times for Labour. Today, the 2 wings of the party were in the appeal court, arguing over who should be allowed to vote in the contest. The hearing has been adjourned overnight, but the battle continues for the very heart and soul of the party, with more claims over Trotskyist infiltration. Our political correspondent Michael Crick is at that hustings in Gateshead and joins us now. Michael.
Well, as Jeremy Corbyn arrived here tonight, he was greeted by a crowd of people singing the red flag. And much of what's going on in the Labour Party these days is rather reminiscent of the old days, the 50s and the 80s, when, of course, there were arguments then about whether revolutionary socialists were trying to join the party. And today, Jeremy Corbyn and his deputy, Tom Watson, continued their argument for the 3rd day running about Trotskyist entrism. Familiar scene. Outside tonight's hustings, people selling Trotskyist papers for revolutionary parties who often stand against Labour, such as the Socialist Workers' Party, or SWP, and the Socialist Party, once called Militant.
There's room for everyone's ideas inside the Labour Party.
And you regard yourself as a Trotskyist, do you?
No.
You're a follower of Leon Trotsky?
I'm a socialist, mate.
A Leninist?
Not really.
What do you think of Lenin and Trotsky?
Well, I think they did a good job at the time, yeah.
In the 1980s, I often reported the hard battle by Labour leaders to expel Militant from the party. Militant, I showed, worked as a clandestine Marxist party within Labour, with its own secret meetings, organisation and policy.
It could turn out that even if people are expelled, Militant at the end of the day is stronger than it was in the first place. Michael Crick, ITN, Swansea.
And the young Jeremy Corbyn tried to keep Militant within the Labour Party, declaring himself provisional convener of the Defeat the Witch Hunt campaign. We'll keep the red flag flying here. Amid noisy protests outside Labour headquarters and after long legal battles, the Labour High Command finally expelled Militant's leaders from the party. This building is no longer Labour headquarters, though it's still called John Smith House. And when the leaders of Militant came up these steps to meet the National Executive Committee, They were kept beforehand in a room up there, looked after by one of the party's office boys who made them cups of tea. That 19-year-old office boy was Tom Watson. And there are those who'd say that he's now stirring things again. Mr. Watson was in the West Midlands today, having yesterday sent Jeremy Corbyn a wealth of material suggesting the Socialist Party, what was militant, and another group banned by Labour, the Alliance for Workers' Liberty, once called Socialist Organiser, are trying to join the party again.
There are a small number of members of Trotskyist organisations that have changed their approach and are instructing their members to rejoin the Labour Party and giving them direct instructions to take control of our young Labour groups and our Labour student clubs. There is incontrovertible evidence of this, and I would like to know whether Jeremy thinks that these organisations should be back within the Labour ranks, and I think it's quite important that we get clarity on that.
And Tom Watson cites this speech by the former militant leader Peter Taff at a recent meeting of the pro-Corbyn group Momentum.
And we said to the left organisations, particularly to Momentum, we want to collaborate with you in a programme to renovate the Labour movement from top to bottom. Yes, we are a separate party, but let us try and organise now a new form of organisation.
Jill Mountford of the Alliance for Workers' Liberty was expelled by Labour earlier this year. Yesterday she tweeted, "Tell Tom Watson we're organising more phone banking for JC this weekend. We'll get an amazing response," she said.
I think it's desperate. I think it's desperate, and if it's not too rude, I think it's pathetic. I'm not an entryist. I'm not infiltrating anything. I'm an honest, open Marxist inside the Labour Party. The Labour Party's always had Marxists in it, and I think it's wonderful. It's a broad church. It should be a broad church of different socialists and different socialist ideas.
Jeremy Corbyn responded to Tom Watson tonight. He backs Labour membership rules agreed by the party conference. Well, in the last half hour, I've asked a spokesman for Jeremy Corbyn whether Mr. Corbyn thinks that the current membership rules should be relaxed to allow members of groups like the Socialist Party to come into the Labour Party. His response? Absolutely not.
Michael, thank you very much. We'll hear more from Michael later on. So Jeremy Corbyn is still very much the favourite tonight to be carried back into power on that growing wave of support from those being labelled the Corbynistas. But who are they and what motivates them? Our reporter Kieran Jenkins has been out and about meeting some of the leader's most ardent followers and has this report.
Hello. Hi. Are you the singer?
Yes.
Wow.
The Scouse singing sensation. Yeah.
Lisa Dempster is such an admirer of Jeremy Corbyn. As you'll soon hear, she's written a song for him. We meet at her sister and nephew's house in North Yorkshire.
He makes a lovely cup of tea.
Yeah. So, Michael's your host this weekend?
Yeah. And he's a very good host as well.
And it's not long before the conversation gets on to you-know-who. Who would you like to be leader of the Labour Party?
Yeah.
I can see you working on him.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Did you ever imagine you'd fall in love with someone like Jeremy Corbyn?
No, I've never thought I'd have a thing for a politician ever. No.
Why? What is it?
It's not the image, obviously, because as I say, it is like sort of having a crush on your dad. I think it's the charisma, it's the honesty, the integrity.
This is your Jeremy Corbyn song?
Yeah.
Did you sing it to Jeremy Corbyn?
Yes.
And you held his hand?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't remember that, but my daughter said, yeah, apparently I did. Yeah, I held his hand as I was singing it to him.
So I'm Jeremy Corbyn then?
Yeah.
How do you have it?
Sort of had hold of his hand like that. Jeremy's standing strong, and we know that he will make it. Although you're doing him wrong, so wrong.
Lisa only joined Labour a few weeks ago. Already she has her own video channel singing Jeremy Corbyn's praises. It's a side of Aunt Lisa, nephew Michael and his friend Dean haven't seen before.
Standing strong.
What do you reckon?
Wow, that was good though.
Yeah.
You should go on Britain's Got Talent.
In Hackney, East London, nobody looks like bursting into song.
I wouldn't say everything about his leadership has been great, but I mean, you know, I support him, and I think there's more good than bad overall.
All right, welcome to
This is an educational evening organised by Momentum, the mighty activist group that emerged from Corbyn's first leadership campaign. But I'm intrigued by the new members among them, tens of thousands signing up, even as Labour turns in on itself.
The Labour Party is crumbling, and he's the man in charge of it. And you're all telling me he's competent.
On what grounds do you say the Labour Party is crumbling? I keep hearing on the news that hundreds of thousands of people have joined in the last few months.
One recent recruit is Amy, a 23-year-old teaching assistant.
What's drawn you to Jeremy Corbyn?
Basically, just feeling like he is representing my politics in a mainstream political party. And that's essentially just the fact that he's anti-austerity, anti-racism, anti-sexism.
What about this idea the deputy leader of the Labour Party has come out with, that there are old hands, maybe some of them here, Trotskyites, Bolsheviks, twisting your arm?
I think it's very patronising to me. I'm a young person, I make decisions autonomously.
In fact, Corbynistas have been called all sorts of things.
There's a lot of things that are said about Jeremy Corbyn supporters that just aren't really true. There's a perception that, for example, they're very London, and they're not. They're more likely to be female. They're not really. It's pretty much the same as Labour Party members on average. They're a bunch of trots, and people didn't even vote Labour before. That's not true either.
Would you say middle class?
No, working class.
Northern?
Yes.
Right. Sharon from York ticks a lot of the pollsters' boxes.
I do think he's a good leader, yes.
You think he could be Prime Minister?
I do, yes. I've read through the 10 pledges that he's put forward, and I think the idea of housing for all...
Are these policies, though, or are they pipe dreams?
I think we have money to spend on things like, you know, wars, tax cuts for the rich, so why is there not money to help people to have what is a very basic requirement?
What is it that you think that he can do for you?
For me, I consider myself a normal person, whatever the word normal is. I'm not rich, I work with children with disabilities, and I've done that for 25 years because I love it. I'm seeing the cuts and the cuts and the cuts. Fellow Corbynistas, when they insist he's just not good enough.
Whatever has stirred in people like Lisa, his opponents would say the rest of the country aren't feeling it. The Corbynistas, though, they're voting for him anyway.
Just keep going. Well, joining me now is the General Secretary of the Socialist Party, Peter Taff, who you saw in Michael Crick's report earlier. Mr Taff was a founder member of the far-left group Militant, and among those expelled from Labour in the 1980s. Now he wants to be allowed back in. Neil Coleman was once Jeremy Corbyn's head of policy, but he quit and is now chief advisor to the leadership challenger Owen Smith. And in a moment, I'll be speaking to a Jeremy Corbyn supporter and newly elected member of Labour's National Executive Committee, Claudia Webb. Peter Taff, let's start with you. You want to get back into Labour. What makes you think that Jeremy Corbyn's Labour wants you back in?
Well, the Labour Party has changed and is changing every day. It's now probably the biggest party on the left in Western Europe. It's a radical party. It's not the same as the Labour Party in the past, when they expelled people for their ideas. I was expelled from the Labour Party for standing up for the working people of Liverpool. We defeated Thatcher. We built more houses in Liverpool than all the councils put together.
OK, and you think that Jeremy Corbyn wants someone back who calls for violent revolution to restore workers' democracy?
Well, that's not true.
Well, it is true. A document I've just read, an article in your name, calls for a new revolution to restore workers' democracy, to complete the work begun in the 1917 Russian Revolution.
Yes, but Cathy, you used the term violent revolution.
Well, the Russian Revolution wasn't exactly peaceful.
Well,
people died and it triggered a civil war.
It's not a point of going into history here.
Well, when you went into history,
when I talk about revolution, I talk about a movement of mass movement of working people to take power and to take the resources of society into their hands. Bernie Sanders in the US spoke about the need for a political revolution. In my opinion, the movement around Jeremy represents that in Britain. An attempt to mobilise to take power away from the ruling class.
Would you describe yourself as a trot?
Well, a trot is used today as a term of abuse to stop people from thinking about the ideas
Would you
that
proudly
we put
describe
forward.
yourself
I
as a
would say
Trotskyist?
I adhere to many of the ideas and the methods of Leon Trotsky. But we don't live in the past. We don't live in Russia. We live in Britain. We stand for a policy that addresses the issues of ordinary working people today.
Right. Neil Coleman, why shouldn't Mr Taff and people like him be allowed back into Labour? He mobilised against Margaret Thatcher and the poll tax. You know, the Fabians and the Cooperative group are affiliated groups within Labour. Why not more of the leftist, Trotskyist groups?
Well, I think before Peter can get back into Labour, he's at least going to have to explain whether he's going to dissolve the separate party that he's currently the General Secretary of, a party which is publicly calling for a split in Labour, which suggests he isn't terribly well disposed towards us.
Would you be happy with affiliate status?
Yes, we would. You've made
There
a
you
very
go.
good point. The same as the Co-op Party is affiliated to Labour. We would like to be part of this new, exciting project.
Neil Coleman, if you could answer that point.
Well, I think the point is, I mean, to be honest, I don't really think the big issue facing Labour at the moment is whether Peter and a few of his fellow Trotskyists are readmitted to the party or not. I mean, as you've said, Peter, unlike me, doesn't believe in a parliamentary road to socialism. He believes in building a Bolshevik-type party that will take power through a revolution.
OK, do you support taking power through the parliamentary...
Of course. We stand for the election of a socialist Labour government that would introduce measures in Parliament to take hold of the 100 monopolies that control 85% of the economy. Let me just point out, when we were in the Labour Party, 3 MPs supported the position of Militant. Terry Fields, Dave Ellis, who's active today, and Pat Wall. Why, if that was the case, would this red herring that Neil has dragged in to try and cloud the debate over Jeremy Corbyn?
Let me go back to you, Neil. What are the consequences of all of this? I mean, you've spoken about an electoral defeat as heavy as 1931. You were Mr Corbyn's head of policy. Why is he failing, in your view?
Well, I think the problems that we face is that at the moment, the party does look to most people in the country to be weak, divided and chaotic. And I'm afraid a lot of that is down to Jeremy's leadership. And parties that look weak, divided and chaotic lose elections. They lose them badly. And we probably face an election next year. The Tories are not going to miss an opportunity like that. We're not putting up an effective opposition to them. And if we lose heavily in that election, that will be a disaster. It will be a disaster for Labour. It will be a disaster for the left in Labour, as people like Owen Jones have pointed out. But most of all, it will be a disaster for working people in this country who need a Labour government.
OK. Well, let me turn now to Claudia Webb. You didn't want to discuss with these two gentlemen here, which kind of speaks volumes about the state of the Labour Party at the moment, but glad to have you on now. Could you answer that point about the fact that a Jeremy Corbyn victory in this leadership election would spell disaster for working people because you wouldn't win at the next election? You've got zero chance.
Well, look, Jeremy is really delivering change, and he's really standing on a platform of anti-austerity. He's basically saying and offering hope for a new generation, really. We're talking about a future which is not based on inequality, but a future that is based on tackling those inequalities, ensuring that we end the divide between those that have the most, which are the limited few, and providing for the many. And Jeremy's delivering that hope and that change.
OK, but there's no future, there's no change unless you win power. And all of the polls suggest that although he may be very popular within a wing of the public who support the Labour Party, he's not going to win a general election.
Well, this is not about, in a sense, popularity within a wing. We're talking about a transformation of the Labour Party, where we've seen a doubling up, more than doubling up of the membership. We're now at 250,000 or more in terms of our membership.
And some of those members are Trotskyists, like Mr Taff here. Would you let him back in? You have the power to decide that. You're joining the NEC.
The Labour Party from all walks of life.
OK, so should Mr Taff get back in?
Well, look, people are joining Labour from all walks of life. Mums, dads, doctors, lawyers, people from
Trotskyists, should they be let back in? Yes or no?
Cities up and down this country, north and south.
Should Trotskyists like Mr Taff be let back in?
I think there's a difficulty with...
You're not answering the question.
I think there is a difficulty with narrowing down the debate with the notion of entryism.
But should he be let back in? You can't answer that question.
You're talking about entryism it's a small proportion, let's face it, it's a small proportion of the real membership of the Labour Party. What we're really talking about is the vast majority of people that are joining the change. They want to take the fight to the Tory government to end austerity, to ensure that we are catering for the many and not for the few. And that's really about the change that we want to see. And Jeremy's delivering that change. He's delivering hope and he's delivering that change.
You have made that point. Claudia Webb, Peter Taff, Neil Coleman, thank you very much for joining me. Jackie.
It's being reported tonight that one of the 3 British schoolgirls who left their homes last year to join Islamic State militants in Syria has been killed, apparently in a Russian airstrike on Raqqa. Well, our reporter, Asad Beg, joins me now. Asad, what do we know about this?
Well, Jackie, you probably remember the coverage last year when 3 British schoolgirls from Bethnal Green in East London ran away to Islamic State-held territory. Shamima Begum, Amira Abbas, both 16, and 17-year-old Khatija Sultana were all students at the Bethnal Green Academy. Now, it was reported that all 3 had married ISIS fighters. Now, it's been reported that the eldest of those 3, Khatija Sultana, has almost certainly been killed in a Russian airstrike earlier this year in May. Now, she was in the ISIS stronghold of Raqqa in Syria. Khatija had been in touch with her family here in the UK over the phone, and ITV News have recordings of her expressing her fears. She told her sister that she felt scared and that if something went wrong, that's it. She'd become disillusioned with life under ISIS and was planning to escape, and her family were hoping to meet her once she crossed the Turkish border. Now, her family have reacted to the news with a statement saying, "We were expecting this in a way, but at least we know she is in a better place." Now, the current location of the other 2 girls is unknown, but it was reported that one of them was believed to be in the Iraqi city of Mosul. There will obviously be fears for their safety, especially with the intense bombardment of IS-held territory by Russian, American and British forces.
Asad, thanks very much for joining us. Thank you.
While staying in Syria, the United Nations is investigating allegations of a chlorine gas attack on the rebel-held city of Aleppo. At least 4 people, including a child, were killed and many more injured in what's believed to have been a barrel bomb attack. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Jonathan Rugman has this report, and just to warn you, it does, of course, contain some distressing images.
This is what the Russians want us to see. 6 of their bombers in action in Syria over Raqqa, the capital of so-called Islamic State. Apparent proof that they're fighting the same enemy with clinical precision. Moscow said many IS militants had been killed. Activists on the ground said the city's water supply had been cut and that at least 20 civilians were dead. And this is what the Russians would rather we didn't see. The Al-Quds hospital in eastern Aleppo last night. A CCTV camera over the entrance filming Syrians of all ages suffering from chest pains and struggling to breathe. A doctor here told us 30 children under the age of 5 had been treated, and a child was among 4 people who died. I had a problem breathing and my heartbeat got faster, said this 15-year-old boy. This man said he felt himself burning like a rod of fire inside his chest. At the scene of this attack, they were salvaging the spent shells. Eyewitnesses here claimed a gas they said was chlorine was dropped in barrels from Syrian helicopters. The UN says it's investigating what may have been a war crime. By contrast, Russian television produced these pictures of happy Syrians receiving aid. Today was the first of what Russia is calling a daily 3-hour ceasefire. Though the fighting continued, and UN officials say it's heart-wrenching that thousands of their aid workers are still powerless to get involved.
3 hours is indeed not enough. 3 hours is really nothing. We need 48 hours. That's how we see it now, and we want to sit down with the Russian side.
In the east of the city, they've given up waiting for the UN. This food has been delivered by rebel forces who've broken the government siege. I've got onions, cucumbers and tomatoes, said this man. We don't need anybody apart from the Mujahideen and God. Rebel forces now control much of eastern Aleppo. We've identified at least 28 different rebel factions in and around the city.
Of these, at least 8 are supported solely by the Americans, 7 by the Americans and the Saudis, 6 by the Saudis and Qataris, and 3 by the Qataris, the Saudis and the Turks. Yet the most effective rebels in breaking the siege are Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, a jihadist offshoot of al-Qaeda with no foreign support. Government forces control western Aleppo, and on their front lines are Syrian troops backed by Iranian Revolutionary Guards, Hezbollah from Lebanon, militia from Iraq and Afghanistan, along with Russian and Syrian air power. But though this is a proxy war, the jihadists who used a drone to film this aren't controlled by anyone, yet they're the most effective rebel force. While on the government side, Lebanese Hezbollah have drones as well, using one here to drop improvised bombs in the countryside south of Aleppo, a technological breakthrough surely of interest to terrorists the world over. The battle for this city, without doubt, the longest, toughest and most complex of the entire Syrian civil war.
Jonathan Rugman there. A report from MPs has called for urgent action to tackle discrimination and employment inequalities suffered by Muslims in Britain. The Women and Equalities Committee says the jobless rate among Muslims at 12.8% is more than twice that of the general population. And it says that Muslim women suffer particular discrimination, as Fatima Manji reports.
They come from diverse ethnic backgrounds, boast different skills and aspire to distinct career paths. Yet all of these women are brought together not just by a shared faith, but also experiences of discrimination in the workplace.
When I am wearing a headscarf, I'm treated as if I don't speak English, as if I'm a bit stupid, as if I don't understand anything.
Being teased about not going to the pub for a drink after work. Why are you teaching a specific subject in light of terror attacks?
And there's been friends who have literally been told, it was for like a finance job or in a bank, they've just been told quite clearly that unfortunately I would hire you, but because you wear a hijab, you won't do well in this field and we can't have you here.
A report by Parliament's Equalities Committee found Muslims suffer the greatest economic disadvantage of any group in society. For Muslim women, it's even worse.
Muslim women, they will face penalties on 3 counts. So as women, as from people from ethnic minority backgrounds and as religious minorities, the kind of the combination of those things will play together to produce an kind of extensive inequality.
Rahana Ali ran workshops here in East London to help women of all backgrounds find work. She found some Muslim women high in aspiration but lacking in confidence.
We were recruiting for the Olympics and we were trying to get lots of people in East London, and they were saying, well, when I wear my uniform, am I allowed to wear my headscarf?
It's really difficult for a lot of women, and really they cannot able to do anything else because this is really a circle several times when you apply the job.
So they get into a cycle of getting knocked back and then they feel they can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
How much is this about traditional families not wanting women to go and work?
If anything, you know, Muslim parents are like, wait, when I turned 16, my parents were like, you need to go and get a job, you need to go and become independent. And all the people that I know, like all the other Muslims and the Muslim parents, were saying the same thing to their kids.
All of these women say they're fed up of stereotypes. Solutions are complicated because of a lack of trust when the government narrative is so often about countering extremism.
If everything is couched in prevent funding or tarnished with that same sort of spectre of counter-extremism, at the base level, communities don't apply for the funding. And so on the off, they're at a disadvantage.
The Equalities Select Committee found this mistrust when gathering evidence.
Some organisations and some individuals found it very difficult to talk to us about their experiences because they were fearful that we were part of a prevent strategy, which they were very mistrustful of. I think the government really needs to separate its important work on counter-terrorism from the work that it's doing to support Muslim people into employment.
These women say they don't want special treatment but a level playing field. And they hope that in 10 years' time, their daughters and the next generation won't still be facing the same battle.
Now, when Jyoti Singh was brutally gang raped and murdered on a bus in New Delhi in 2012, the response was outrage in India and around the world. Mass demonstrations demanded action to halt a culture of widespread sexual violence against women. But almost 4 years on, how much has changed? Our Asia correspondent Jonathan Miller has been talking to Jyoti's parents, who say women still live in fear of being attacked, and to those of a more recent rape victim. And be aware, his report does contain some very distressing testimony.
The cluttered crush of suburban Delhi, its rooftop lines strung with vibrant, freshly washed saris, conceals its dark, squalid secret. This city is the rape capital of India. Here, women live in fear of sexual violence so extreme and so common that one shudders to think what each new day's headlines will bring. Gang rape, acid attacks, murder by poison, strangulation or fire. And most of the predators just get away with it. In Delhi's outskirts, an urban village where, one night in March, a family's rooftop terrace was the scene of a frenzied attack. A young local man broke into the house, seized, raped and then violently murdered a 15-year-old girl he'd allegedly been stalking for months. The girl's parents cannot bring themselves to even use the word rape. Their lives, they say, have been totally destroyed. Her mother heard screaming at 2:30 a.m. After the rape came the killing.
He killed my daughter without any mercy. He killed my daughter torturously. He attacked her with a knife here. He slashed her leg. He hit her on the head from behind with a brick and everything came out. It was merciless. Mummy, she screamed. He's burned me alive. Mummy, he threw kerosene on me. Mummy, my head is bleeding.
The teenage girl died 2 days later. She had burns to 90% of her body.
I had so many hopes for my child. She used to say, "Dad, I'm going to study this and become this or that." She had so many aspirations. She wanted to be a doctor. She would tell us her dreams. We keep remembering these things while we're eating, while we're sleeping, when we're just sitting down, when it's school time.
Her alleged killer was arrested and is now on remand, awaiting trial. His family still lives in the neighborhood. The official statistics reveal that across India, a woman is raped every 15 minutes. Around 40,000 rapes a year are reported, but such is the stigma that most are thought to go unreported. Women who've been raped are made to feel shame. They're ostracized and rejected for marriage. And violent rapes apparently on the rise. 3 years ago, there were nationwide protests and much soul-searching following the horrendous gang rape and murder of a 23-year-old Delhi student in late 2012. Her parents named her as Jyoti Singh. Her ordeal was so prolonged and so brutal that India was sickened. The country caught in a global spotlight of shame. Women demanded they be better protected. It felt like a watershed moment. Of the 6 men convicted, 4 were sentenced to death. Another gang member killed himself, and one was a juvenile. He served 3 years and has already been freed. India's Supreme Court is now hearing Jyoti's rapist's final legal appeal. Although the number of reported rapes across India and here in the capital has dramatically increased since Jyoti Singh's gang rape and murder, it's likely that the main reason for this is that the uproar surrounding her case gave more women more confidence to report sexual assaults. Amendments to criminal law have also made it incumbent on police and judicial authorities to take firm action faster. New laws prescribe longer, harsher sentences, including the death penalty for rape. The age at which you could be tried for rape as an adult has been reduced to 16. But the wheels of Indian justice turn slowly, and years can go by before sentencing. Jyoti Singh's parents have not recovered from what they call their catastrophe. They broke Indian law by publicly naming their daughter. The identities of women who've been raped are required to stay secret in an effort to reduce the stigma.
It's just a fact that daughters are close to their dads. When she was young, she would fall asleep on my chest, and even when we moved her, she'd come back. After what she has given, society is forever in her debt.
Today, a female child is like a paper plate. You use her, crush her, and throw her away. In Indian households, there's a big difference between boys and girls. As they grow up, the boys get it into their heads that no matter what they do, they can get away with it. Children should be taught at home that if a young woman is being harassed, you should protect them, not join in.
India, some jest, is the world's largest hypocrisy, because for all the soul-searching over Jyoti Singh's rape and murder, this is a nation addicted to lavish and overtly sexual Bollywood movies, many of which stand accused of casting women as glamorous accessories and perpetuating what they call here rape culture.
This is a girl who was coming back from school.
Over the past 2 years, this Indian photographer has travelled the length and breadth of the country, meeting women who've been raped, and with their permission, taking their portraits. She hopes this will help dispel stigma.
You know, there's a question of suppression. There's a question of subjugation. And how do you suppress a woman? Rape her. You know, doom her for life, shame her for life. Because shame is always associated with rape. But rape is just a crime. Why should shame be, you know, associated with rape? And why should the blame be on the woman? Why not the men? And if a woman is raped and she loses her virginity, why should she not be able to find a man and marry? You know? And why is her family treated as nobody? Why are they also blamed for it? Along with the girl, along with the woman. This needs to change.
Indian women are moving out of the shadows, though, and finding a voice in this man's world. And for that, many women think they're being punished. Why, they ask? You wouldn't treat a goddess like that.
Jonathan Miller with that report. Well, I'm joined now by Pavan Amara, who founded the UK's first sexual health clinic for victims of sexual violence, which is branching out to help victims in India, and Ione Wells, who became a campaigner against sexual violence after her letter to the man who sexually assaulted her went viral. Pavan Amara, let me start with you and that heartbreaking quote from Jyoti's mum. A female child is like a paper plate. You use her, crush her and throw her away. If that's the culture in India, do you accept that is the culture?
Yes.
And how do you change it?
Yeah, it's progressing, and it's progressing really rapidly due to people like Jyoti's mum who are saying things like this and, you know, really saying things that need to be heard. Her parents have been amazing with all of this and incredibly brave in challenging the culture. What she's saying is really true, and people have known it for decades, but they just haven't said anything about it. So still in India, when girls are born, parents routinely cry. People don't celebrate that like they do with a boy's birth. And that's something that, again, people are starting to challenge, but it's only just happening. In a lot of Indian households also, you have this discrepancy where boys are even given more food than girls. And so it's all of this stuff which it stems from in the first place.
Ione Wells, it can't be said that this happens in the third world and not here, because it happened to you, didn't it?
Yes, I think there is a kind of dangerous assumption that it doesn't happen here, or it doesn't happen, a particularly dangerous assumption, I think, that it doesn't happen in institutions or environments that we believe to be developed, that we believe to be leading the world, whether that's top universities or our kind of professional workplaces. When actually, my own experience at university, I've seen, although what happened to me didn't occur at university, it's very, very apparent that there are many cases every year that happen at Oxford, at all the universities across the UK, that prove that this isn't an issue restricted to developing countries. This isn't an issue restricted to anywhere. It happens everywhere.
And the figures from End Violence Against Women suggest that one rape is reported every half hour in the UK, compared to every 15 minutes in India. I mean, the figures may well be an underestimate. But you bravely tackled the whole stigma surrounding rape by waiving your anonymity and publishing that amazing letter to your attacker. What prompted you to do that?
Well, I think, as this film has been doing as well, what it's been kind of trying to challenge is something that I felt very upset by, was the fact that despite hearing about sexual assault all the time in the news, despite knowing how high the statistics are in the UK, I never actually heard a single person speak out about it publicly. It's something that is still ridden with shame, ridden with kind of stigma. And I wanted to put a face and stories to it and say, look, we're humans here, we're individuals, we're not just news stories, we're not just statistics that you read about in the papers, we're human beings, and we are, we're trying to speak out about something which happens as frequently as any other crime, which, if it were theft, if it were murder, victims would be treated as humans who have voices.
Pavan, how critical is it to tackle that stigma in the way that Ione has?
Hugely. If people don't talk about it, then you can't find solutions to the problem, quite simply. And people are starting to do that. But Ione's made a really good point in the fact that we talk about India and the spotlight's on India, but actually it's a huge problem in this country as well. And in India, I find certainly that people are far more willing to talk about this. They know there's a problem, they've identified it, and they're moving forward with it. Whereas here, we have a similar problem, as we've just been talking about, but people like to pretend that that doesn't exist. Their ears aren't as open to that issue. They're not quite as prepared to have these discussions, and we really need to be having them.
Ione, you thankfully managed to bring your attacker to justice, but this week, for example, at the University of Colorado, a student was convicted of sexually assaulting a woman who was drunk, but he won't face jail. And that's something that has echoes of the Stanford swimmer case, doesn't it? How does that strike you, this ability to bring people to justice?
I think it's really difficult because obviously there are so many complications when it comes to bringing justice in these kinds of cases. For a start, many people feel that because of the stigma surrounding it, they don't feel comfortable reporting it, and also they don't feel comfortable with the Stanford case that you mentioned. What was so harrowing, I think, about her victim impact statement was her descriptions of the justice system, how she was challenged and made to feel guilty. She was challenged on the fact that she was drinking. She was challenged on the fact that she was out, that she was having a good time out at a party, like any other student would be her age. But I think, there are much deeper set of problems we have here that we're talking about. We're talking about problems ingrained in our justice system that do sort of perpetuate this idea of stigma and blaming, the fact that people are actually afraid to report something and go to trial because of that.
Ione Wells and Pavan Amara, thank you so much, and I could carry on discussing it much more. Jackie.
Well, let's go back now to Gateshead, where the second Labour leadership hustings is taking place this evening. We're joined again by our political correspondent, Michael Crick. Michael Crick, what's been said so far?
Well, Jackie, actually the most amusing moment came just a few minutes ago when all of a sudden, just as they were about to move on to the question of energy policy, the lights went out, the whole room was dark, and both candidates were left sort of trying to exchange jokes with each other.
Promote all this, but if our message to the rest of the world is that the lights have gone out,
plunged into darkness.
And when it came to the actual serious debate, I think the most interesting exchanges of the evening, showing real differences between the two men, were over Europe.
Look, a referendum has taken place, and I think we have to recognise that whatever we feel about it, there is a result from that referendum, which we have to work with. Sophie.
Right, let's move on.
Jeremy, what that shows, what that answer reveals, I think, is the truth. Let me finish. What that reveals, I think, is the truth that you were never really bought into the idea of the European Union. That's what it says to me. And what I hear from you is that
other countries are contemplating a more protectionist, introverted, introspective future for themselves, and therefore we've got to work with that.
France?
Well, France wants to be part of the European Union, unless you're supporting Marine Le Pen and those people who want to leave, which I know you're not.
Absolutely.
So I'm absolutely certain we should be in. And I'm worried that what this reveals is you've never really liked the idea of the European Union.
Are you becoming a mind reader?
Well, I don't need to be. I don't need to be. You told us for 30 years you weren't keen on it.
No,
and
no,
only in the
Owen.
referendum you seem to come undergo a Damascene conversion.
Owen, you and I stood on platforms together and argued the case for human rights, environmental rights, consumer protection, environmental protection, market access for British industry in Europe. And we agreed on that.
The debate at the Labour hustings there. After the break, it came out of the streets of struggling 70s New York. Now, the Australian producer-director Baz Luhrmann has returned to the roots of hip-hop for a new drama series. We'll be talking to him about The Get Down.
Welcome back. It was a new musical art form formed out of the poor black neighbourhoods of a bankrupt city by young kids looking for something new. Hip-hop and its origins in late 1970s New York has now attracted the attention of Hollywood director Baz Luhrmann. He's teamed up with rapper Nas and Grandmaster Flash, one of the original artists, to make The Get Down about this creative era. Jasmine Dottiwala has been talking to British artists about those early days.
This ain't no fairy tale.
The Get Down is an educational, informative and entertaining look at hip-hop history and the early days that shaped hip-hop into being the multi-billion-dollar industry that it is today.
I got courage.
Let's take a trip back in the time, 1977. It was maximum crime.
Hip-hop grew out of the crumbling ghettos of a then bankrupt New York, at a time when the American economy was taking a battering due to shock oil prices, at a time also when the disco and funk era was starting to feel stale. Young black and Latino youth at the time were looking for something fresh, and they found it.
As a DJ, the Get Down is the part of the record that is the most funkiest. So as a DJ, you try to keep the Get Down continuous, so it sounds like a loop. You play it from one turntable to the next turntable, and the b-boys just get down to that part of the record.
On the eve of the Get Down's release, we spoke to British hip-hop royalty about what hip-hop means to them.
Hip-hop is our religion, it's an energy, it's a movement, and it's something that kind of like keeps me going.
Obviously, hip-hop culture has, in a lot of ways, been dragged apart. Yeah. So the culture is not represented in the same way as rap music. You know, rap music is known as hip-hop. Yeah. But hip-hop is a culture, rap music is just a musical element of that.
Aside from rapping and DJing, which are much more prominent globally, other elements of hip-hop culture include breakdancing and graffiti. These elements, according to British graffiti master Artful Dodger and one-time breakdancer John Z.D., think that new school artists have left behind.
It's not so much where it's going, but who's going to take it there. And if the younger generation are going to be like the next generation to overtake it and be the overseers of it and the guardians of it, then they have to be informed.
One of the Get Down's producers, hip-hop legend Grandmaster Flash, has said that the younger generation eats from the hip-hop cake, but aren't aware of the ingredients it took to make it. We put this to young hip-hop outfit, The Age of Luna.
It's true that everybody now is eating off the hip-hop cake because hip-hop really did shift the culture of everything it is now. I don't necessarily think that people care entirely, but it's important to research and understand where what you're doing comes from.
Grandmaster pinpoints the Get Down part.
The Get Down has faced some controversy. There has been debate about whether director Baz Luhrmann has sufficient hip-hop credentials.
Us watching the pilot for The Get Down, it's like my heart melted because I felt it.
I was worried. I saw the trailer and I thought this is going to be like a hip-hop version of Glee. or the remaking of the Kids from Fame, something like that. Yeah. And I was pleasantly surprised.
I know a guy who's worked on the film with Baz Luhrmann. He lives in the Bronx, and Baz basically allowed everybody to tell their stories. I saw it. I think it's amazing.
Who's the lucky lady gonna be tonight? Yeah!
Well, I spoke to the director Baz Luhrmann and the actor Yahya Abdul-Mateen, who plays the character Cadillac in The Get Down. I asked Baz Luhrmann first, what makes a white Australian think, I want to make a series about the birth of hip-hop?
I just started out wanting to answer the question, which is, well, about 10 years ago, I saw this picture in France, in a French cafe, of two kids from what I found out was the Bronx. And I wondered, how did a pure, new, creative idea like that get born in a time that was so difficult? And it was really just wanting to answer the question, and it took me on this immense journey. And what I started to unpeel was a story that had never really been told. And the forefathers of this form that has affected me as a filmmaker, and I think everyone around the globe to some extent in popular culture, and it had never been celebrated.
And yet at the time, I mean, the Bronx was quite literally on fire.
The Bronx was on fire, and there was a part of the Bronx that did look like Dresden, but so many other parts of the Bronx were, you know, were vital. Yeah. Of course there was violence, of course there was destruction, of course there was much negativity. But you see, every person I spoke to that we worked with, all of them said, when we were young, we didn't see the negativity. Yeah. We saw the possibility. What I became wrapped up in and just felt, could I help this be celebrated, was it was the purest form of creativity by the young, unfettered by, you know, I'm going to be a YouTube star or I'm going to, you know, sign a record contract. It was just, I'm doing it because I exist.
And I have a passion and I have a curiosity and an ability to figure out what I'm made of.
Grandmaster Flash, who is one of your producers, you know, Yahya, he talks about how, and you've touched on it, hip-hop was about saying we exist, we matter, and that's a real message you get out of the series.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, these are young people. You know, like I said, they will not be silenced, and you know, they have no idea that they are that they are at the beginning of something that's going to go on and change the entire landscape of the world. You know, it changes how we live and how we experience life and sound and music. And you know, they're just trying to get to the next day or trying to ask a girl out to a dance.
But someone said, I think Seth, one of our writers, said it beautifully. He said, they mythologized ourselves because he was there. He said, we mythologized ourselves because we protected ourselves against the hurt, against the pain, by being cool and being almost superhuman in our minds.
It's interesting what you talk, as you talk about ambition and you talk about the resilience of these young people, and Yahya, that notion that, you know, we matter, we exist. I mean, how does that play today at a moment in time in America where we see the Black Lives Matter movement growing?
You know, I don't think that the show is, for me, it's not a direct response to that. You know, I think that's real life, and that's something that that has to play out on its own here in America. But what we can take from that is the possibility of what can happen when you get outside and use your voice and use your resources. And it's so important to say, I will not be silenced. That's the same thing that's actually happening in the Black Lives Matter movement, is you have young people, you have older people, people from all generations, and actually, you know, we see it across, it's international. People are getting outside and they're saying Black Lives Matter, they're saying that we will not be silenced. That's always the start for making something happen and for creating change.
And I got to add to that, I think we're lucky that we happen to be telling a story at a time when there was massive racial tension and all sorts of tensions that are reflected in the day we live in today, but the answer wasn't violence. What happened in this borough was that kids were finding an answer which was creative, like paint your voice up on a train. Even though it's illegal and a bit dangerous, that's a whole lot better than taking up a brick and hitting someone. I mean, we're looking at a period that was a transition from violent gangs into gangs of musicians and dancers. I'm all right with that.
And Yahya, can I ask you, as a young actor, what is it like to get the call or the email from Baz to say, I want you to come and work on a project I'm doing?
Yeah, I was in school at the time. It was about a month before I graduated. And, you know, I'm sitting down and I get a phone call. And I remember what was so odd about that phone call was that, Baz, you asked me if I would join. And I was like, I had the, you know, my reaction was, how could I not, you know?
We might have had other things on.
What do you think is the message of this series, if there is one?
When younger people imagine and dream something up and want to express themselves and invent the way they do that, then they own it. And if they own it enough, and if they believe in it enough, sometimes, not always, it can actually turn into an influence and a true expression that goes on forever and changes the world. Now, this isn't a fairy tale. This actually happened, you know? And I think that is the message of the show.
Baz Luhrmann, Yahya Abdul-Mateen, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to both of you. Thank you so much.
That's all we've got time for tonight. That's Channel 4 News. Good evening.
Good evening.